Good morning, Corey.
Good morning.
So it looks like we're missing a good chunk of our usual people today, but that's all right. They might show up later, and if they don't, well, life goes on. Royanne posed a really good question earlier for me, and it's a question that the other class that follows yours in the morning asked as well. And the question is, does one person turn in the group assignment, or does every single person in the group turn in the group assignment? It's not a big deal as to which one you guys choose to do, but if there are people in your group that, like, if you guys decide that only one person is going to turn it in, just know that I'm going to have to override your grades in Canvas to get it to accept your final grade, which I don't mind doing. It's super easy, but it does look nasty on Canvas. So those of you that really care about like the pristine uniform look that makes it look like you're not missing anything, you might want to submit your group project. Okay. If you don't care about making it look like there's something missing, even though there's not, and I can override and put a grade in, it just still shows missing for some reason, even if I put a grade number in there, then it doesn't matter. But if you do care about that uniformity, you might want to go ahead and submit it. And good morning, all of my latecomers. Not super late though. Are there any other questions about the group project today? Once again, just a reminder that every single group member does need to do that group survey in order to get your overall grade for your group. So do keep that in mind, even if you choose to just have one person submit it. Corey, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Yes. Where do we find out where do we go to find out what our group is?
Your group, Corey, has been trying to message you through Canvas for 2 weeks now. It is
Yeah, I
on your
haven't
Canvas
got any
inbox.
messages on here.
It's on your Canvas inbox. It's also under people. So I will share my screen and show you where you can find that. So your Canvas inbox is over here. They've been sending you messages through that. They've also been sending you messages through your discussions.
Yeah, my inbox, the only thing in my inbox is from you.
Okay, then you might want to look under discussions. I'm not sure what they sent it under. It might be under discussions, and you can see who's in your group by going to the people tab. And your group is slightly irritated with you, Corey. I will let you know that ahead of time so you know what you're walking into. Because they've already pretty much done the entire project.
Professor, sorry, I'm a little late.
By myself.
Courtney, hi. Corey is asking about the group.
Yes, so
Yeah, I was since I'm so late on this project, can I just do it by myself?
I would have to deduct a lot of points on you, Corey.
You would?
You might want to talk with Courtney and Sadie and see if there's still stuff you can do.
Corey, I was going to tell you, Ty actually needs a little bit of help, so I've scheduled a Google Meets today that him and I are going to meet at about 10:50. If I can send you that link if you want to join that.
Can you repeat that? I didn't get any of that.
Yeah, I was just saying that Ty wanted to meet because he had a couple questions. So I have a Google Meets scheduled for today. We're going to get online about 10:50. If you want to join, I can send you that link.
Okay.
And
yeah, that'd be perfect.
What are you going to send it through, Courtney, so he knows where to look?
Through your school email.
Okay.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you.
Yeah. under your modules. So I was just asked where you could find your group survey. It's right under your censorship module. The project survey is right there. You can also find it under assignments if you prefer to look for things under assignments. Any other questions about the project? That's, oh, sorry, Courtney, you are here. Okay. So then we will go ahead and move on to today's lesson. Today we're getting towards the end of our different medium styles. We just have craft and architecture left, so we're going to finish those off this week, today and tomorrow. Today we're going to go over craft media, which I kind of hinted at yesterday, has a lot of the same things. So we're going to be talking about ceramics and woodworking today. We kind of already touched on it a little bit yesterday with sculpture. But we're going to add on to craft media with a few other topics as well. So oftentimes, if something falls under the term craft media, it means that it is not considered an artwork. However, artists and people that are interested in craft media are working and pushing to get those things accepted into the art world and considered artworks. And I personally feel like it should be considered art as well. I mean, you go to art museums and you see works from ancient civilizations in their pots. And they used their pots to carry things and store things, and those are considered art pieces. So why is pottery no longer considered artwork today? Is the interesting question that I would pose. But generally, the thing that separates craft media and artworks is function or purpose. If your pottery today that you're making has a purpose, then it is craft. If your pottery has absolutely no purpose or function whatsoever, it is elevated to art. That's generally what's used in museums and galleries today to determine the difference between craft and art. So today what we're going to be doing is looking at different mediums that would traditionally be considered craft media that are being elevated into the art world by taking away their purpose or function. So William Morris's Windrush, which is a wood block print wallpaper pattern, it does have a function. It's wallpaper. So William Morris's Windrush is considered a craft generally. And like it says on that last point there, artists are challenging the notion of function by trying to take away that function. And there's different ways to take away that function depending on the medium that you're using, and we're going to be covering quite a few today. Here is a little snippet of that wallpaper pattern. So the first medium for craft media that we're going to be looking at today is clay. Clay is generally comprised of soil, some silica, some other ingredients like talc powder and water, and it's mixed together in literally a really large mixing bowl. If you think of your like KitchenAid stand mixer thing for cake batter, just imagine that for a really large vat of clay. Most places will mix their own clay in-house because it's cheaper. So here at Midland College, we do mix our clay. So that is once again comprised of dirt that is not from around here. It's usually a red dirt that's used. If you've ever driven around or been outside of West Texas, you might have come across red colored dirt. That's what you would use for clay. You mix that with some silica powder and talc powder and add water to get it wet, and then you have your clay. When you're done mixing your clay, you will then store it in blocks. So you'll grab wads of your wet clay and pound it into the shape of cubes, and then wrap it in saran wrap to keep it moist and put it in storage. So you make large batches of clay and then use it as needed. Of course, you would want to store it in an area that won't get dried out, because if your clay dries out, you can't use it anymore. So you'd store it in a humid, moist area, which is also why you saran wrap it, to keep that moisture locked in. Ceramics is the art or science of making objects from clay. There's several different methods that you can use with ceramics. There's throwing pots on a potter's wheel, which we'll watch a video of in a second. There's just hand rolling and hand modeling with clay, so using your fingers. There's also the coil method. The coil method is just rolling your clay out into, like, if you were young and you played with Play-Doh and you made like snakes or something, it's like that. And then you wrap them around and add to it and get a pot. Ceramicists are the people that are making works from clay, and potters are specialists in making dishes. When you are making your clay, like I said, you keep it moist until it's ready to use. Then you'll mold or model or throw whatever it is you're wanting to make. You'll let that air dry to get a good chunk of the moisture out. And then you're going to fire it or bake it in a large kiln. It's basically a giant oven that gets to really, really high temperatures. That takes out all of the leftover moisture and solidifies that ceramic piece. There are different kinds of kilns. The most basic one is just a large oven kiln or an electric kiln. There's also open wood kilns and raku kilns. And there are 3 different kinds of clay. There's earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. Earthenware is very porous and lightweight, and it's fired at a really low temperature. It's your most basic form of clay. Stoneware is not as porous, it's a lot heavier, and you would fire it at a very high temperature in order to take all that moisture out. And porcelain is obviously the most rare form of pottery. It is very lightweight, very fine, and the most expensive, and it is fired at the highest temperature of all. And it's white. And literally all of those are the same, just a little bit of a different version of dirt. Earthenware is that red dirt. Stoneware is more of a black-based dirt, and porcelain uses a white powder, which is not around here at all. Throwing is the process of shaping clay on a potter's wheel. Fun fact is you can use earthenware clay to make stoneware. I wouldn't recommend it because it messes it up, but you can do it. I know in my ceramics class, so for the kiln firing process, the first round when you're just trying to get all of the water out of it, you would normally bake it in electric kilns, and you bake it for about 13 hours. So it's a long process, but it's electric, so you can just set it and it does its own thing. So normally when you're working with like a class of students, one student will be like, okay, I'll be here at such and such time and I'll start the kiln. And then everyone else just loads their stuff in there as they go throughout the day. And then that student at the end of the day will set it for everyone. I know one time in my ceramics class, the person that said he was going to set the kiln had never done it before, but he said he knew how to do it, so we all trusted him. And he accidentally set it for the stoneware setting, which is super, super high temperatures. The professor came in the next morning and that electric kiln, which was not supposed to go that high as far as the temperature setting, was red hot. And he was freaking out. He's like, we're lucky we didn't explode the art building. But yeah, so you can bake earthenware at a stoneware temperature, but I wouldn't recommend it at all. So like I said, the process of throwing clay is shaping clay on a potter's wheel. That's generally how you would make pottery, plates, bowls, cups, things like that. And then, like I said, you would air dry your piece to try and remove a good chunk of the moisture, and then you'll fire it in a kiln. After it's fired through that first process, you'll let it cool down, and then you can decorate it with a glaze. So there's two kinds of glazes. There is a metallica glaze, which is similar consistency to like watercolor paints, and you would paint your designs onto your pottery. And then the other kind of glaze is where you can just dunk your whole ceramic piece into the glaze and be done. Done with your life. Then after you glaze it, you have to fire it again to get that glaze to do the chemical reactions that it's supposed to do and solidify and harden onto that ceramic object. That's where the other kilns come into play. So with metallica, you would just use the electric kiln again to get that to bake on. But for a lot of the dipped glazes, you would use an open fire kiln or a raku kiln. Those are a lot more fun anyway. The only downside with a raku kiln is that you cannot use any of the pottery pieces later on to eat with because the glazes used for raku are toxic, which takes away the function, which is the whole purpose of trying to elevate these craft media to higher arts, is that if you do use a raku glaze, it's toxic, so you can't use it and it has no function anymore. So it is elevated to art at that purpose. With an open fire, there are glazes that you can use to like eat off of. It just depends on what shades you're using. Generally, if you're using a blue or a purple glaze, that's always going to be toxic just because the materials and chemicals used to make blue and purple are highly toxic. You'll find that in glassware as well, unless you put another coating over top. So like it says here, a glaze is a liquid paint with a silica base. And there's a whole lot of chemicals that go into those paints. Sounds very basic. Before we move on, I do want to show you guys a little video of someone throwing a pot on a potter's wheel. So the first thing that you have to do is get it centered. If you don't get that piece of clay centered on your wheel, it's going to be lopsided and it's going to be really hard to throw. Once you get it centered, you can start molding it. You do have to constantly keep it moist in order to keep it moldable throughout the process. He's using an electric potter's wheel to do this. For this one, you just turn on the switch and push a pedal, and depending on how much pressure you're putting on the pedal, it'll go faster or slower. Old-timey people would have to constantly pump their wheel to get it to spin. And then, of course, that was the end product back there. And if you guys weren't in the 8 a.m. class, we could just mosey on down to the art building and actually see people do it. But a good chunk of the art people don't get there until the afternoon. So you guys don't get the pleasure of seeing that. They are not morning people. In fact, fun fact, I'm the only person in my department that gets here before 10 a.m. So you will not see any people working in the art rooms until at least 10 a.m. But feel free at any point, if you have free time, just walk down that hallway. You'll see people painting, and they don't mind if you pop in and ask questions. They love talking about their art. Speaking of talking about their art, there is a artist talk that's taking place today at 11 o'clock. UTPB is hosting it via Zoom, and the contact information for that is on your Canvas announcements page. It's a printmaking artist. She's going to walk through the process of how she makes her artworks and answer questions and things like that. Yesterday she did one as well, but I guess that there were a lot of technical difficulties with it, so they're going to try it again today. And I will get that link updated for you right after this class, probably, because it's a new link from yesterday. But yeah, sorry, little side plug there for talking to artists. So popular ceramic artists who have managed to elevate their craft media to a higher art form are Betty Woodman and Adrian Sachs. Both of them have decided to take away the function of their art purpose or their artworks, either by using glazes that are toxic and can't be like used to drink out of, such as divided vases cubists. She literally just painted on part of this and just left the paint there. You don't want to drink paint. That would be really bad. And then Adrian Sachs here with his rulers of the future world. This serves absolutely no purpose at all. It's a little joke on, like, you know how there's that saying that cockroaches will still exist even after mankind destroys itself? So up at the top are two little cockroaches. Because they're going to be the rulers of the future world. And that's just a little play right there on a Fabergé egg, which those are like really collectible porcelain pieces from Russia. And they're covered in bugs. So with this piece, it looks like there's no like hole in it, right? But with all ceramic pieces, the last one as well as this one, you always have to leave some sort of an air hole because in the heating process, the air expands. And if there's no hole left in your object, it's going to explode when it heats up because oxygen expands when heat is applied. So with this piece, the hole is actually located at the bottom where that pedestal is, just so that the air can circulate in and out. Otherwise, it had blown up in the process. So the larger acceptance of clay as a higher art form is mostly owed to the man named Peter Voulkos. Peter Voulkos made plates, and plates are a pretty common thing to make with clay or ceramics or porcelain. But he used a raku firing technique. And I already mentioned raku is toxic with the chemicals that are used in it. For example, you'll frequently see lead and things like that used. Lead, windshield wiper fluid is another useful one. You would use toxic things that you don't want to ingest later on. And then raku firing to finish off, he would usually bury it in manure. So it's just not something that you would want to really use. I mean, you can wash the manure off, but because of the chemicals in manure reacting with the already heated up chemical, that usually just adds to the texture of the glaze and helps continue on with that chemical process after it's been taken out of the heat. So yeah. But what he did is he tried to elevate this not only by using glazes that you can't like eat off of, but he also tried to make them look more like paintings than plates, which you can kind of see here. It's like a contemporary painting. And then our last ceramic artist is Takezu with his Makaha Blue 2. So with this one, once again, blue glazes are usually toxic, so that takes away the function right there. He's evoking the traditional Japanese ceramics. Eastern Asia is well known for their ceramic pieces. You'll notice that when we talk about China and Korea as well later on. And China is known for porcelain. It's what they do. Funny enough, it's recently been discovered that Japan was the first civilization to rely on pots to carry things. It was thought that it was the Sumerians or the Egyptians, like that culture, that was the first one to use pottery to store things, but it turns out it was actually a small island in Japan that was the oldest. And here is his Makaha Blue. It looks like an upturned vase, which the hole is actually on the bottom for the air to escape. But if you set it on the other side, it would just fall over and break. There's absolutely no function to it. Moving on from ceramics to glass, glassware is another medium that's usually considered a craft. However, artists are doing a wonderful job of trying to elevate that, usually in the same way that they do with clay by using a toxic chemical that makes it lose its function. They'll also do interesting shapes with it that take away its purpose, similar to what we just saw with Makaha Blue. Glass was used really early on in the art world for stained glass windows in churches. We're going to talk about those quite a bit later on when we get to architecture tomorrow. And then, of course, there's blown glass. You can use glass inlays on objects. Of course, to make glass, you would heat it up to really high temperatures and get it into a liquid state to use it. And when it is in that liquid state, it's very moldable. And then once it cools down, it hardens and crystallizes. And for this one, we are going to watch another video. This time it's of someone blowing glass. And if you've never watched anyone blow glass, it's really entertaining. So that was just broken pieces of glass. You can repurpose it, and they're just heating them up. Once that glass is heated up, it would be put in on the end, like in a ball shape, onto a pipe with a hole in it, and he is now just blowing air into it. It's kind of fun to watch. With this, if you were going to do this for a job, there are a lot of dangers that come with it because, like I said, they are using toxic colors in there, and you're literally like inhaling and blowing, and yeah. So you could possibly inhale those chemicals, which is not good for your lungs. Also, if you were to inhale while that thing's super, super hot, that's not going to be good either. So there are quite a few different dangers with that. Michael, did you have a question?
No, sorry.
Okay, I was just wondering. So prominent glass artists or artists that are trying to elevate glass from craft are Dale Chihuly and Mona Hodum. We're going to look at Dale Chihuly's C-Form series. Chihuly uses glass and tries to make glass look like it's part of nature. So shape glass into natural looking objects that you might find walking around in a garden. Now with Dale Chihuly, some people get very upset with him because he doesn't actually make any of his stuff himself. He will send off his ideas or thoughts to a factory like the one we just saw on the video, and they make it for him. And then he makes a whole bunch of money off of it. Mona Hodum, on the other hand, does make her own art pieces. Here is one of Dale Chihuly's C-Form sets. And you can purchase one of Dale Chihuly's little bowls for like a couple $1,000s. So kind of cheaperish for an art piece, but still a lot of money. You might have, if you've ever been to Las Vegas and looked at the ceiling of the Bellagio, it's covered in a Dale Chihuly piece. He has a large amount of artworks because he doesn't make it himself. He just sends it off to a factory. So he's really well known for his large sculptural glass pieces. So this is all made of glass, and that's actually him there. This is what you'd see at the ceiling of the Bellagio. If you go to the Dallas Museum of Art, they have a Dale Chihuly piece in their cafeteria. He also does these floating orbs and reeds. He had a show in Dallas at the large park in downtown Dallas. A few years ago, it was the year that there was a really bad hailstorm and glass outside in a bad hailstorm. Yeah, a lot of the pieces ended up broken and the park actually had to pay for it to replace it. So that sucked for them. But he does really cool art. But yeah, some people don't like him just because he doesn't actually make it himself. He will draw it or sketch it and put little notes on what he was actually wanting off to the side and send the drawings and sketches or paintings off to the factory and they will copy it for him. He later on afterwards, he'll sell the painting, the drawing, and the end artwork. So he's like triple making money off of it. So he's, I don't know if you consider him a really smart businessman, probably. There's another artist that we'll talk about later on that does the same thing, and he's even more famous than Del Chihuly. Our other glass artist, Monohodom, this is her Nature Morte Ox grenades. And this is actually a statement on wars. Why might this be a statement on wars? And what might that statement be? What are the glass things? Grenades. So she's made really pretty colorful grenades using a lot of, well, she basically just used a mold to do it with the glass. And underneath the grenades is a gurney. What's a gurney usually used for? Moving bodies, yes. So it's usually used to move bodies. So what is the statement that she's probably making? Don't think too hard. Grenades, something that carries bodies. Put the two together. Don't make Anna do everything.
Grenades kill people.
Yeah, so she's making a statement that war and, well, she's using grenades to symbolize war, results in a lot of death. That it might garner a lot of attention and media. This was around, yeah, if you look at the date, you'll understand why. And that is how she chooses to elevate her craft. She gives it meanings and purpose in a different way than glass would normally be. She's taken away the everyday function of glass, like being used for tableware, and given it a higher purpose. Now we're going to move on to our next craft media, which is metal or metalwork. We talked about metalwork a little bit yesterday with Julio Gonzalez Constructions, which were just welded sculptures made using a welding tool. Metalworking has been around for a very, very long time to make tools, armor, weapons, things like that. The most prominent people group that used metalwork in an artistic sense is the Muslim or Islamic religion. In Islam faith, you are not supposed to show images of people. God created people, and therefore you as a person should not try to compete with God. So instead of showing images of people in their artworks, they would show organic life forms like flowers and vines. They would also do a lot of geometric patterns. And we still see that carried over in their tradition today. And artists have become very inspired by that, such as the artist that we're about to talk about. An early example of a Muslim piece, this one was made for Europeans, so it does have a person on it. It's a rare example of something with a person, but it was once again made for Europeans to collect, and they wanted to appeal to that audience. But it uses brass and inlaid cut pieces of silver. That is it right here. But you can see the detailed filigree and patterns that are quite repetitive going on here. So they had to make the brass piece and do something called repoussé, which is beating your image into your metal piece, and then they inlaid those beaten areas with very tiny detailed cut pieces of silver after. So an artist that is inspired by Islamic metalworking tradition is Cal Lane. Cal Lane combines that style with contemporary themes. Originally, Cal Lane was a welder and now an artist shown off in museums and galleries. And we're going to look at his Untitled Map 3, which is a 55-gallon oil drum. And it has the map of the world on it. Why use an oil drum? Why have a map of the world? Why? What's the message? Yeah, the world runs on oil, basically. We love oil. The world loves oil. That is that contemporary theme that I was talking about earlier. So I said Cal Lane uses a Middle Eastern style with contemporary themes. So that contemporary theme is that the world relies quite heavily on oil, and you can see that same technique that you saw in the D'Artenberg Basin of meticulously inlaying different things and cutting out different areas to get your geometric patterns and floral designs. Of course, Cal Lane was using something very helpful to make it, whereas the D'Artenberg Basin did not have the option of using a plasma laser to cut stuff. Now we're going to move on from metal to wood. Wood is another medium that is generally considered to be craft. Wood is pretty easy to come across. It's abundant. There's a lot of it. And it is the only material that we've discussed so far today that comes from a living thing. Oftentimes, artists will play on the fact that wood comes from something that was once alive. You can definitely see Henry Gilpin in his Curiosity Red play on that idea or notion that he got this piece of wood from something that was once living. So for Curiosity Red, Gilpin used a piece of wood from an elm tree that was near his studio. He cut the tree down and made the table out of it. The tree already had a bit of a warped style to it. It was knotty and oddly shaped. And he played with that shape to make his Curiosity Red. Curiosity Red is a table, but it's a table that you can't use because that tree was so warped. And here is that right there. So you can see he really didn't change the form that the tree was already in. And of course, he glazed that with a red stain. Why use red? Why leave it like this at the bottom? Because it looks bloody. And once again, he was trying to play on the fact that this comes from something that was once alive. So he's making it look like it was bleeding at the bottom, like he has just murdered the tree, which technically he kind of did. Another artist that uses wood is Liv Blavarp. Liv Blavarp uses wood to carve jewelry pieces. Her jewelry is based off of folk Norway traditions in carving. So we're talking like Vikings carving dragons and animals onto masts of ships and things like that. And here is her jewelry piece. This is just one of them. This is her necklace. It's supposed to look or have reference to different animals. This one's not like the best example. There's better examples. But this is the one we've been provided. And now we're going to move on to pretty much, I think it's like our last medium for the day. Yeah, it is fiber art. There's two kinds of fiber art. There's off loom and loom fiber art. Does anyone in here know what a loom is? Nope, didn't think so. This is the one that I usually remember to pull up a picture of a loom. I'll put that slide up back up in a second for you guys online, I promise. So we're going to look at a picture of a loom before I get much further. This one is only $27. You can own it yourself. So this is a loom. Now they have like mechanical ones that pretty much weave themselves. But fiber art comes in two kinds. There's off loom, meaning they aren't using this technology at all. And then there's loom fiber art. Loom fiber art uses warp and weft threads on a little frame like this one. Your weft threads are the ones that are going horizontal, and your warp threads are your vertical threads. So your warp threads are already strung into the loom, and then you just have to weave in and out your weft threads in order to use a loom. And as promised, here is that slide back up again for you guys. So we're going to be checking out both off loom and loom examples of fiber art. The whole process of weaving, whether you're doing it on loom or off loom, you're still going to be weaving. For example, if you were making a basket, you're not going to make that on a loom because that keeps things flat, and you don't want a flat basket. That'd be not a basket. So you still weave when you're making things off loom. You're just not having the assistance of the loom to do it. Looms are usually made for like, well, if you're going to make something on a loom, it's going to be for like clothing or making a tapestry, things like that. If you're using off loom weaving, you're making baskets and things with shapes. Both of those things have those warp and weft fibers. And our first example of fiber art is going to be a Persian rug. Persian rugs are considered rare, coveted, expensive objects. They are made on loom, so they would have used a loom in order to make these rugs. A lot of times when you're looking at a Persian rug, they're often used for prayer in Islamic faith. They're like the prayer rugs. Today, Persian rugs, there's like a ton of knockoffs of them. And here is that rug. So the rug itself consists of a mandala design with sunbursts around it in those oval shapes. And like I said, it would have originally been used as a prayer rug, but this one is a very large one that would have covered the entire floor for people. Another thing that's often used in weaving or made with weaving is tapestries. We've looked at tapestries briefly before when we were studying cartoons. Tapestries are really large wall coverings that show designs or stories on them. Those would also be made on loom. And our example of a tapestry is by Laura Bellotti. It's a really, really large tapestry containing a whole bunch of individual pictures of really famous artworks. But she did it using the traditional tapestry making technique. She did, however, despite using a loom, pre-program it into a computer, so the computer actually like monitored to make sure things were being woven correctly, which is nice that you can do that today. And then of course, like I said, there's a whole bunch of different designs on it. And there's a close-up. And you can still see the weft threads there and some of the work ones. Another example of fiber art is quilting. Quilting is traditionally considered women's work, women's piecework, women's busy work, hobbies for women, things like that. However, in the 1970s, the second wave of feminism tried to elevate quilting into a higher art form and make people realize that it wasn't just women's craft, but that it can actually be art. Miriam Shapiro is one of those artists from the 70s that tried to elevate quilt making. Shapiro was already a well-known artist that was accepted by museums and galleries at this point. She did a lot of like anti-Vietnam War artworks, and then she decided once the second wave of feminism became popular that she was also going to start supporting that as well. So she switched from making paintings to making quilts. And that's what we see happening here. Does anyone know how a quilt is made? So for quilts, you get different pieces of fabric. You get a quilting mat, which is basically like a fluffy little blanket. And you start sewing together those different pieces of fabric to make patterns or stories or designs, which is exactly what Shapiro did. So it's just different pieces of fabric sewn together. A very different version of quilt making can be seen in Polly Applebaum's Flatterland Funky Town. These are just different pieces of velvet, crushed velvet, that have been sewn together. So the same technique that you would use for quilt making, she did here. And normally quilts would be displayed on a wall or a bed. Polly Applebaum has decided to display her fiber art piece on the floor, so you have to actually walk around it and interact with it. And yeah, it's just pieces of velvet sewn together. And our next fiber artist is Faith Ringgold. She is known mostly for her quilting. She was taught how to quilt by her mother and grandmother. It was a family tradition, and she picked it up from them. With her quilt making, she likes to show narrative stories from her childhood growing up in Harlem, which is a predominantly African American neighborhood. So it gives insight to her, like, it's not the nicest neighborhood if you've ever seen it. So it's like a lower class African American neighborhood, and it kind of gives insight and opens eyes into what her life was growing up there as a child. Here is one of her fiber pieces. This is Mrs. Jones and Family, but she's probably more well known for her story quilts. Her story quilts show literally, like, okay, so the other thing that Faith Ringgold is really well known for is she writes children's books. So her story quilts literally have stories written on them as well as illustrated. If you're interested in seeing one of Faith Ringgold's books, I do have one in my office. I should have brought it. I'll try and remember to bring it tomorrow, but she writes and illustrates them, which is kind of cool. But she writes on these story quilts, stories from her own life, stories from her grandmother's life, her great-grandmother's life, kind of a writing down the oral tradition that was passed down in her family. And we are going to look at her tar beach. So you can kind of make out at both the top and the bottom, there is writing there that tells us what's happening in the image, the story of it. The basic gist of the story, in a very paraphrased version, is that during summers in Harlem, it was really, really hot, and all of the wealthier people would go to the beaches and go on vacations during summer, but her family couldn't afford to do that. So what her mom and dad would do instead is they would make a tar beach on the roof. They'd set out blankets, they'd play games, they'd cut up watermelon and bring food and lemonade, and the whole family would get up there and just enjoy each other's company and enjoy the summer evenings in Harlem together. So they couldn't afford their own vacation, they made it. They made their vacations. And she really remembers those summer nights fondly. And our next fiber artist is Nick Cave. Nick Cave does very different fiber arts. I'll just show you the image right there. So quite a bit different than anything else we've looked at so far. These are large statues. So they are wearable. You can wear that if you want to. He's done like fashion shows with them. I don't know why you would want to wear them, just to see it. It's kind of like an enjoyable little experience. He uses offbeat materials, which you can see. And it's based on the idea of getting hand-me-down clothes. You know how usually when you get hand-me-downs, there's like holes and patches and random stains. So it's based on the idea of Nick Cave inheriting a lot of hand-me-downs as a child and they being a mess. That is what that is. And I did add on one last fiber artist just because I have a soft spot for them. And we will end with this artist. This is the art stylings of Yinka Shonabar. And we are going to watch a little video about Yinka Shonabar with him talking about his art. Because we can do that since he is a contemporary artist. I need alive to tell us about his art.
Good morning. How are you? Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. What's going on?
So that's the artist right there.
they're very vulnerable to crash.
Oh,
Art junkies.
yeah,
Even
yeah,
if we put someone right next to it, like a guard.
yeah. Working in London as an artist, anyway, it's already crazy to just make this a choice. It's difficult enough. Working as a black artist is twice as difficult, I think. People accept the fact that you're a black artist and you're working. This wasn't the case, 15 years ago.
And with all the background lights like near the wall, that would be gone, right?
We can lower that. Would you like me to lower and show you what that would look like? Yeah, we'll just do that.
There were not many role models of very successful black artists when I left art school. A lot of the black artists who were working mostly had to teach and didn't necessarily make a living from their work. And I had to devise ways of, making myself heard and my work, to be received. And I wanted to see if there was a way of actually transcending those barriers and seeing if those barriers could somehow be pushed down and find a way of doing it in a subtle way. One of the difficulties I think that the generation before me had, perhaps the work was seen as maybe threatening, I don't know, and so private galleries and private collectors were probably nervous to engage with the work.
Did we talk about, did we talk about the lighting for the gentleman's parlour? What happens inside there? And that's it?
That's it.
But you generally don't have any lighting around it?
What you can do is you can highlight some of the furniture.
Right.
So that you can, yeah.
The room itself is supposed to be not very well lit at all. Is that the case?
Yeah, no, obviously lit enough so that people can see what's going on in the room. But you still want to give the feeling that of inside and outside.
Right.
So I think I tried to devise a way I thought, would actually make it possible to get my work into the system. Rather than actually standing outside of the system and shouting at the system. That's where the kind of trickster thing comes in, really, in a way that people are kind of just tricked, rather than knowing that I'm actually confronting them with a gun, and then realizing, once they've been absorbed into my world, realizing actually that this stuff is actually quite lethal, but not realizing that immediately.
So like he was saying, he's trying to, in a bit of a hidden message way, make or confront people with Black history and the fact that Black people in history have not been accepted by society. You can see that in the fact that, yes, all of these figures are headless, but they are clearly all white. And he is adding on to that theme specifically with this one. This one's a little bit easier to understand than some of the others. The patterns and the fabric are traditional African prints. And it has to do with the story. This is like where most of his art originates from, and then it's just evolved since then, with the splitting up of the continent of Africa by Europeans. So if you're familiar with European colonization at all, you know that different European countries met, and at that meeting, they divided up the continent of Africa without any regards to traditional patterns or people groups. They just decided what country got what and split it up, and that's exactly what's being illustrated there. You can see down here's Cape Colony. And when that happens, places like South Africa become industrialized by these European colonists. They're trying to make as much money off of the land of Africa and their investments as possible. And one of the ways that places like South Africa make money is by selling fabrics to Europe. So here we see Yinka Shonabar has used that idea of places that were colonized making a ton of money off of their silk fabrics that were being exported out and their nice cottons. Africa was one of the major exporters of cotton back in the 1800s. It was outpacing America even, making money off of those exports. But instead of using European prints on the fabric, that's what would have been popular back then, he has used African traditional print to remind people that, hey, that's where your cotton came from that you're wearing. Also, you'll notice there were some that had like guns pointed at them. That was also to like nonchalantly add in the fact that we are your equals now and you need to accept that. In notions such as that, you'll notice even in that room, the wallpaper had famous African American and African athletes in it. Throughout the little wallpaper design, all of the fabric for that room is done in African design. And you'll notice the little hint that he said, I want them to feel like they aren't in it, they're out. I don't want them to feel like they're a part of it. That also hints back to the fact of colonization and the white people that colonized the European colonizers, wanting the Africans, the traditional Black Africans, to feel like they were other instead of a part of something. There's quite a lot of history and racial tension in Yinka Shonabar's use of fiber in order to create his artwork. So he has definitely helped to elevate that particular craft into a higher style and given us a lot of things to think about with that subject matter as well. And that was an interesting note to end on, but I couldn't talk about fiber art and not talk about him because he's my favorite. And he's super nice too. I got to meet him in person in London. Really, really sweet guy, easy, down to earth, which I appreciated because I was young and I didn't know what I was talking about. So, those of you that showed up late, don't leave because I need to add you to attendance because that's what happens when you show up late. I don't quite catch you. Those of you that are on time, just remember that you need to continue working on your group projects. Tomorrow we will finish off with our mediums finally with architecture, and then we can move on to art history. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. If you have any questions about your project, feel free to email me and I will get those answered right away. But I will see you guys tomorrow.